Alright, so this is attempt number 2 at recording this because I forgot to unmute my mic on OBS, but we move. Recently, we saw Gardevoir's run of dominance come to a close, and that was by the hands of none other than Zoroark EX and Liam Halliburton. And you might be thinking, Zoroark EX? Yeah, Zoroark EX has finally won a major tournament. This is its first major win, and I am not surprised. I honestly thought this might come a little bit earlier because of how the meta has shaped up. And I think Zoroark has been an incredible pick from before Worlds. We saw it gain notoriety at the World Championships, getting 2 places in top 8, which was an incredible finish for the deck, and just no one has really been playing the deck and respecting it, and I think it'll finally get the recognition it deserves with this victory. My girlfriend is going to be very happy because Zoroark is her favorite Pokemon, so I'll tell her the news in the morning. But we saw it beat Aban Ahmed in the finals, and look, alright, I'll play the clip in a second. You might say kind of a scam, because Aban didn't actually get to play the finals, because in his top 4 match against Calvin Connor, we unfortunately saw a big pop-off from Aban, which is not the bad thing. Cool, very good for him to pop off, but we saw Calvin Connor take his Monkey Dory by accident. Here's the clip.
Story of this event. You know, he picked the deck, he knew, and this is where it happened right here. They're showing the moment. The Monkey Dory flies over to his opponent's side of the field, and as Calvin Connor is packing up, he inadvertently picks up the Monkey Dory. Oh, and the Bond sets up without 60 cards in his deck.
Yeah, Cal has 5.
So yeah, unfortunate if you're Aban. Definitely not how you want that to go, but Aban has been having Aban has been having a great run of tournaments. He just came off a win at Monterey with Gardevoir and now gets a 2nd place at Pittsburgh. So shout out to Aban Ahmed, and yeah, Liam Halliburton definitely earned the win. But now let's talk about the deck, and let's talk about why I think Zoroark is going to be a very strong contender, not just now, but moving forward. So Zoroark EX has a sweet little ability, and you probably know exactly what this ability is because we have seen this ability on a Zoroark before, and that Zoroark was moving like prime 2018 LeBron. And this one might just be doing the same very shortly. So we see trade. Discard a card, draw 2 cards. Every time we have seen a card with this printed, it has had some form of success. You might be thinking that Purloin or that thing didn't have success. No, it did with Sander Wojcik. It's in his control deck. So yeah. Anyway, Curlia, Refinement, discard 1, draw 2, major success. Trade, 1 World Championships. So what's to say that Trade is not going to do it again? And I think it might actually do it. It might, okay, maybe not win Worlds. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. It almost won Worlds last year, technically. Well, this year, but with 2 top 8s at World Championships, not bad. Anyway, so this is the deck that Liam Halliburton played to the event. I'll open it as an image so you can see it a little bit better. And you might be thinking, this deck looks like a very normal Zoroark deck, and that's something that I find that's quite weird. Obviously, when Zoroark first came out, everyone was quite hyped for it, but it was very underwhelming. It can only copy its Ends Pokemon, and Ends Pokemon have very bad attacks. Let's be real. Reshiram is just nothing. 170 damage isn't great, right? Powerful Rage isn't great. It requires on your opponent to deal damage to you. And then we saw the Darmanitan. I'll put it up on screen now. The Darmanitan obviously was the highlight of the deck. With no Manaphy in the format, people thought this is the savior of Zoroark, and I would agree. I think it had the tools to really to do really well. It had a great attack in the first attack that dealt damage for each energy in your opponent's discard pile, which helped its really bad matchups like Goldengo, like Raging Bolt. But it's not featured in the decks. And why is that? Well, that's because the fire guy his job has been taken over by a green guy, Toedscruel over here. Toedscruel is an incredibly strong Pokemon in this current meta, and cards in your opponent's discard pile can't be put into their hand by an effect of your opponent's ability or training cards. This is almost specifically a direct counter to Goldengo, because Goldengo uses superior energy retrievals to put the energy back into their hand after dealing massive amounts of damage, and that's something that this deck can't deal with, massive amounts of damage. So what other deck comes to mind when you hear massive amounts of damage? Raging Bolt, right? Raging Bolt is this deck's probable worst matchup and the matchup that you do not want to see. So you might be thinking, well, if these are the matchups that this deck can't really handle, why are you not playing the fire guys? Because Darmanitan takes up so much space, and Toedscruel just has a really cool controlling aspect and just puts a lot of pressure onto these Gholdengo players. Because if Gholdengo does target down the Toedscruel, you have another Toedscruel sitting on the bench, and then once the Toedscruel dies, you can just go Night Stretcher, bring up another Toedscruel, and they just can't get energy from their Discard piles, so they have to be really careful with their resources. And then we see the counter towards this deck's worst matchup, or matchups plural, because I think this deck's worst matchups are the Terra decks. Terra decks have been on the rise. Recently we see Terra Box, even in this tournament, doing really, really well. And we also see Dogbox picking up a little bit, and then obviously Raging Bolt is still always been there, always has been, and that's why we see 2 copies of Team Rocket's Watchtower, colorless Pokemon play. Both yours and your opponents have no abilities, and that is really strong because Noctowl is turned off, Ursaluna is turned off, and Pidgeot is turned off. So this also helps in your Charizard Pidgeot matchup, which might become a little bit more prevalent moving forward as well. But mainly it's for the Raging Bolt and Terra deck matchups right now, which are your worst matchups. Obviously, Dogbox has so many ways to deal with your Zoroark, being the Leafeon, being the Flareon, being the Sylveon to just shuffle him back. And also, Sylveon can do 106 damage to Zoroark, and Zoroark just can't do that much back. Sure, it can do 260, but it's not enough. And you might be thinking, oh, but just move some damage with the Monkey Dory, but, you know, you move some damage with the Monkey Dory, and all of a sudden, you're not doing that number anymore. So yeah, you can't one-shot any of their dogs, and 2 of them can one-shot you. You're not going to be attacking with the Sylveon very often in this matchup, but obviously it can just kind of break you. Also, Angelite hurts. Doesn't help either. And then Terra Box has the best counter to this would be the Pikachu probably, and also the Teal Mask Ogerpon. Both really good ways to deal with the Zoroark, because Zoroark just doesn't have a great way to deal with the Pikachu. I guess you could argue the Maractus isn't bad, but it's just not great, right? It's just not great. Something that I think you could include in this deck, if there's a lot of Joltik box around you, would be a Venture Bomb, because you can pop the Venture Bomb, move damage with Monkey Dory, and then break the Pikachu like that. But the problem is you have to use the Binding Mochi on your Zoroark, because you still don't do enough damage with Virtuous Flame, even with the plus 20 damage from the bomb to kill a Pikachu, because you're only missing it by 10, doing 190, which is it's quite funny, to be honest. But yeah, moving on, we also saw 2 copies of Air Balloon, and I think Air Balloon is a really cool inclusion in this deck, because one of the main ways this deck can lose is by getting Reshiram trapped in the active spot, and then something like Screamtail comes along and just snipes everything on the bench and just completely ruins you. So now Reshiram isn't that much of a disappointment. What is it? I forgot the word, but anyway, you can slap a Air Balloon on liability. That's what I was trying to say. You can slap Air Balloon on Reshiram, and it's no longer that much of a liability. And yeah, super nice. And then obviously you have 2 of those. Obviously you can't find them with anything in this deck, because the deck doesn't play any real search other than Secret Box. The Arvins aren't in this deck. Instead, we see 3 copies of Cyrano and 2 copies of Hilda. We also see 2 copies of the Artisan. So the deck essentially is try and get some Zoros in play, and then from there you can flood your board with cards like Cyrano, cards like Hilda to actually find your Zoroark EX. Obviously, something that Zoroark does struggle with sometimes is actually finding the energy, so that's why we play the Hilda, so you don't have to play the Earthen Vessel, and also under Badulok against Dragapult you can still find your energies. Anyway, so this is the list, and I think this deck is really good. So why is Zoroark doing so well? Well, like I said, it can be attributed to its matchup spread, and it has a great matchup into Gardevoir EX, it has a great matchup into Dragapult, and you might be thinking, well, how does it have a great matchup into Dragapult? Well, that's quite simple. Obviously, you only have one attacker, which is the Ends Reshiram, which, look, let's be real, this card on, like, first look, not great. 170 damage, you're 2-shotting everything in format, sure, but that's being generous, right? That's being generous. Monkey Dory can very quickly turn that 2-shot to a 3-shot, and Powerful Rage depends on your opponent. But that's the thing. This is one of those matchups where Powerful Rage can really put in some work. Powerful Rage, this attack does 20 damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. So if Dragapult does 200 damage to you, you can fling 400 right back. And if you have 2 Monkey Dory set up, you can move 40 of that damage elsewhere and still have enough damage on your Zoroark to actually completely one-shot their Dragapult. So it is very, very strong. And decks like Charizard also can't deal with it, right? They swing 180 and then you swing 360 back. So this kind of helps the deck in a few ways. Zoroark's bad matchups are the Oko matchups, right? And those matchups are kind of fixed by the Rocket's Watchtower and the Toedscruel. And then you've got the spread matchups, which are fixed by Powerful Rage, right? So the deck can really hold its own against almost everything in the format right now. And that's why I think this deck moving forward is going to be really, really strong. You might be thinking, okay, but when Megas come out, well, what's going to happen? Well, the same decks are still going to be really good. Gardevoir is getting a buff, right? Which is crazy to say. Gardevoir is getting a buff, and that means Zoroark is not going to go anywhere. It also means Goldengo is not going to go anywhere. And those are good matchups for Zoroark, right? Dragapult is Dragapult. It's not going to go anywhere. Another good matchup for Zoroark. Charizard is also not going to go anywhere right now. I think it's going to get stronger in the next format. And because of that, I think Zoroark is also going to take a good matchup into that. Obviously, it can get a little shaky towards the end of the game. But it's nothing that Zoroark can't deal with. And the nice thing about Zoroark is that, well, it has trade. It is its own attacker and draw engine. So you can play around with these slots very, very easily. You can mess around with the deck, and we see so many different iterations and variations of Zoroark come to play, and a lot of them have success. We saw Gabriel Fernandez get second at World Championships in the Senior Division, and there's just been a lot of Zoroark recently. Maybe not as much as you see like Gardevoir and Dragapult, but it's been seeing pretty decent results. And because of that, I think people are going to start taking an interest in the deck and actually going to start playing it more and more. And because of that, I think it might actually become a top deck. And obviously, after this next set, we have the Phantasmal Flames, or whatever it's called, and that's Mega Gengar, right? Mega Gengar makes Zoroark EX a 1-prizer, right? We also see a new card coming out that lets you look at the top 7 cards of your deck and put a dark Pokemon you find there on your bench. So now Zoroark EX can basically be a basic 1-prizer, which is insane. So you don't even have to worry about something like TM Devo from a matchup like Gardevoir or a matchup like Grimmsnarl. So there's definitely ways that this deck will be played in the future, and there's definitely going to be a place in the meta for Zoroark. And Zoroark is still a very new card. It is an I format card. It's going to be around for a very long time. So I think obviously the attackers aren't the strongest. Well, the attacker, unfortunately, I don't see the other guys making their way back in his deck. I think it's just going to be Reshiram. It would have been so much better if Reshiram was a dark type as well. But unfortunately, this is what you kind of have to work with. And it might actually be the first time that we've seen Pokemon print a good card that isn't completely overpowered, but it will actually see a good amount of play. Because you can't tell me that this, being Zoroark's Soul Attacker, makes Zoroark, like, you know, really, really strong. So this is a actual fair play by Pokemon. They've made a deck that is strong and also not broken. But I think cards that might come around and help the skeleton of Zoroark EX become stronger, those cards are going to be the problem. Mega Gengar EX is looking to be really strong. I don't want to speak out right now because I think everyone has their opinions, but I don't think... Anyway, you know what? That's a topic for another time. Thanks.